Good evening and hello. How is everybody this evening?
Good.
Welcome to our first webinar for in Indiana. I'm originally from Indiana myself, born and reared here. And of course, I had to take the opportunity to work with all of you. My name is Laureen Sims, and I will be the facilitator this evening and the mediator. So I will let you do a round robin of introductions, and then we'll proceed with our questions. So let's start with Debrika.
Oh, me? Okay. Hello. I'm Debrika McClung.
Onye. Hi, I'm Onye Maki Davis, and my sign name is as such. Robert.
Hello, everyone. I'm Robert Haney Jr.
Junior. Let's emphasize the junior. And
Yes.
Renelle. Hello, I'm Renelle Johnson. And do you have a name sign? Renelle. Thank you. Next, we have William.
Hello, everyone. I'm William Babineau.
Fantastic. Before we proceed, we do want to establish a few ground rules. I will be presenting each question one at a time, and whoever feels compelled to answer first can raise their hand, and then the next person can proceed likewise after that. We do have 1 hour, and we have 5 questions to pose to the group. So use your time accordingly, and let's not give a full lecture this evening, but answer the questions as you can. And if we have time remaining, then we would love to elaborate on a few of the questions. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
So the first question that we have tonight is, what is Black Lives Matter? What does that mean to you? Whoever would like to go first may go. Renelle.
Black Lives Matter historically comes from when slaves were brought to our continent, and that feeling has never passed. We are maintaining our culture, our identity, and continuing in that manner. We're still struggling with oppression and everything that we are still facing today.
Absolutely. I like how Renelle has started with framing this in the aspect of slavery. We started this movement with Trayvon Martin's untimely death in 2013. But Renelle is right that really this movement has been ongoing and has technically started since the beginning of the slave trade to the United States.
Yes, and that's been a part of our history, our heritage that has permeated our lives. And really, we still carry that. We embody that in our lives. And even though we weren't personally slaves, we do have family members at one time who were part of that. And so we do want to continue to teach future generations about these experiences.
Onye. Black Lives Matter for me means that it's an issue of police brutality, but I look at it as more than that. I know the media sensationalizes the police brutality portion, but it really speaks to the fear that Black people live with every day. We often don't feel safe doing simple tasks like shopping or going to the mall without being scrutinized. We can't sit in a park with our families without being concerned that we're being inspected in some way. And I think this is, of course, it starts with Trayvon Martin's untimely death, and this is when we've seen the modern movement begin, also followed by then Eric Garner, who said he couldn't breathe. And now we see that same comment from George Floyd and his untimely death. So the Black Lives Matter movement has continued, but I think George Floyd then, because people witnessed so obviously the death of George Floyd, that finally was the impetus we needed to make this movement, take this movement and blow it up. I think about the Black boy who is 10 years old who sees a cop and might hide behind something and then continue about his day. And they really avoid the police from a very young age. I saw another video of a 10-year-old Black girl who saw a white cop approaching and immediately threw her hands up in the air, and living with that kind of fear, she was frozen in terror and crying. Kids don't need to go through that. And this is where Black Lives Matter has escalated to the point where we're garnering world attention. William.
Well, I'm glad we're having this opportunity today to really air our feelings on this matter. There have been so many incidents in the world that have happened, and it gives rise to such thought and consideration where we know that these situations should not be happening, and it's time for something to happen. That's where these protests arise, marches, really trying to educate people in the communities at large about the severity of this situation, and that we really do need to take action.
Absolutely. And pulling together and having numbers behind us really does help. Robert? Yeah, I would really like to add that. And I'd like to clarify my name sign is RH, but that's okay. I would like to add that Black Lives Matter is organized, and it is in such a way that now we think enough is enough. With Trayvon Martin's death in 2013, I feel that we had some momentum, but then it faded. But now it's an explosion. The fire is burning, and it really caused us to coordinate and move forward with the movement. Dabrika.
I think Black Lives Matter really does talk about that coordinated movement. And when we look at what happened to Trayvon in 2013, in my perspective, there are a lot of older individuals that have experienced this. The Selma March, Rodney King, the things that he went through, all of these different incidents, it pulls the attention of our youth, and they see what the elder people have been through. And then we think about it's time for our generation to jump in and really act. And that it's time to do something and to see how we can reduce and eradicate these issues. Because really it all comes back to how it will impact them. And it's really hard on them as well. It's not just adults who are facing this. And we need to keep our focus on the youth because they're so innocent in all of this. And oftentimes they have not received enough education in this matter.
I like your comments about starting to expose the youth to the Black Lives Matter movement. As Onye had commented, a young Black girl was afraid of the police already at the age of 10. And so how do we address that? And how young is too young? They should be enjoying childhood. Thank you for answering that question. Are you ready for the next question, or is there more elaboration on this one? Renelle.
I would like to add, these comments all really mirror what my thoughts are, but at the same time, I think a lot of white individuals look at that and think, what's the point of Black Lives Matter? Everyone matters. But it's really, it's about oppression. It's about racism. And we're ignoring the system. We have to remember the culture and the history of the people and what they have faced. And so when we're looking at this, I think the perspectives as a whole are quite different. And how do we collaborate and work together? I mean, we've been asking for change for years and years and years, and people have ignored these issues. So we've suffered enough at this point. And so think about what slaves went through, all those years ago and all the different experiences that they've had. And here we are today. It's still an issue. We're still feeling those same pains that other
Absolutely.
individuals felt as slaves. So it's bringing that to a forefront. And, it's really um, not enabling us to really express our opinion. So how, we're not animals. What is it that people are viewing us as, that they think that these things are still okay and that we're being treated the way that we are?
Thank you. So the next question is, what then is important to you about the Black Lives Matter movement? What is personally important to you? So you explained what it means overall, but how does it apply to you, and what is important to you about it? Is that question clear? Okay. Take a moment to mull that over if you'd like. Onye. When I reflect on the Black Lives Matter movement, I speak out against racism. We must end the ongoing abuse, job inequality, and oppression of Black people. I think that people finally need to hear our cries. They haven't been heard thus far, and we have had enough. Simply put, Black Lives Matter, which I think is confusing to people because people will retort with all lives matter. But what they fail to understand is that Black people in this country have suffered for so many years, and we carry fear with us. So it is important to understand those stories, that they understand the suffering that we have endured over the years. There are so many people who live with privileges and can walk through the world without daily fear, and we don't. And that must be recognized. And we are human just like everyone else. We are one body of humans just like everyone else. But it's not recognized. We're not recognized in that way. So that is how Black Lives Matter affects me.
Well, for me, when I think about my value as a person and what I pass on to future generations and what I can bring to them, and that real importance, and what are their lives going to look like tomorrow? What are things looking like from minute to minute? We just never know what can happen. And I think about how I have to protect myself, and I know that I matter. And I know I am a human being. I am.
Absolutely, you are. Definitely. Are there any additions to this question? Dabrika? Well, Black Lives Matter is important to me because I can't afford to make any mistakes. With white privilege, I notice that white people can get away with error after error, mistake after mistake, and still survive. But I cannot make those same mistakes. I can't. And I might make the same mistake as a white person, for example, on the job, but I would be fired immediately and the white person would not. So Black Lives Matter is important to me, and I feel that that gives me a voice. And I cannot sit by and be complacent watching this inequality occur time and time again, inequity occur. So we have to voice the fact that Black lives do matter. And as long as another person can make a mistake, if a white person can have the privilege of making errors, then I should be able to too. There is no difference between the two of us besides the color of our skin. We have the same bones. We've got the same body structure. We've got the same blood that runs through our veins. But there are lots of privileges that come with the color of the skin. And the emphasis of Black Lives Matter to me is that we are all equally important. Renelle, I see you have one more comment, but why don't we let Robert and William comment, but after you're finished then.
I'd like to emphasize that Black Lives Matter is about justice. We know that the system makes things unjust quite frequently when we look at employment opportunities, living opportunities. We should have equal opportunities in all these ways. So it's really all about justice for all.
And I might remind the panelists that you're not obligated to answer every question. So if you're still thinking on that question, we can come back to it. I can move on to the next one. Would you prefer to answer? Oh, William, okay. Well, I think Black Lives Matter is important to me. And I know we've mentioned employment quite a few times. I do notice discrimination on the job. I might be qualified for a job, but not get that job or be awarded that position because of the color of my skin. Or even while on a job, communication is not ideal. Because I have to have an interpreter, communication becomes a barrier when I go to my job. So it does feel like double discrimination in my case. So I think Black Lives Matter is important in the deaf community and to me because people do need to know about our experiences. Absolutely, it's an awareness raising movement. And let's not forget to add, I forgot to add that we will have a question and answer session when we are finished. So when we get through our questions, we will be able to accept questions from the broader audience. So we will try to allow time for that. Robert, should I proceed with the next question? Sure, we'll come back to that one. So the next question is, how can we support and uplift the community in this movement? Debrika.
Well, how we can uplift and support the community is to start with you, each and every one of us, me included, all of us. And parents as well, and the deaf school, the surrounding schools, everyone. We have to work together to educate our children. And I don't think that our children do get that education, and the deaf school doesn't always teach that Black history, et cetera. So we need to make sure that they're getting that. And parents at home have a lot of that responsibility on their shoulders. Of course, Icbda as well. We are available for many resources, other Black organizations, NAACP. So those types of community resources are out there and those supports are in place and available to support everyone. So parents do have responsibility, but I do feel that sometimes parents think, oh, I have a deaf child, oh, they can't do this or they can't do that. And it doesn't matter whether the parents are hearing and deaf, but we want to make sure that our children are educated and that they are able to look up to us and they will follow the behaviors that we present. And so we really become role models and we really do have a big impact on our children and we need to support them. So each and every one of us needs to be there to support our children. It begins with all of us. I think that's where it all starts.
And William, I saw you had your hand up, and then we'll go up to Ronell. I would like to see more workshops provided. Do you mean workshops for uplifting the community and giving support? Okay. Yes, I think I would like to see more education, more training, and more empowerment of the community to do this work. Everyone has the ability to do this work, use their voice, and express their concerns. It's not just, but I think it is just that people don't know how. And so I think this would be an important aspect in how we can uplift the community. I think Renell was next. Yeah, Renell. When you talk about uplifting and supporting the community, I think encourage or uplift is the same thing. Great. I think what we could do is collaborate with organizations, and specifically ISD, Indiana School for the Deaf. We talk with children, we talk with the system administrators, and we already have been doing this work for a couple of years. We have been doing this work at ISD. We let them know what's going on in the community, and we started that partnership, and we have really developed a system whereby people can learn about this work. So you might see other organizations that are proceeding with this work, and other organizations are recognizing that we can be allies for each other. So we've got 23 organizations in the whole of Indiana that we have partnered with in doing this work. But why do we continue to be oppressed, and why do we continue to experience being devalued or being dehumanized? But at ISD, we have been providing a plethora of resources, and it is people of all colors that do need help. We have been supporting people as they go to the hospitals, as they go to other situations. Anyone can be an advocate, and we've been providing that advocacy support for the community. Robert.
Yes, I'd like to add, I think what people have been saying here tonight, I agree with completely, but I think it begins with that allyship, that cooperation, and it starts at home from early on. We have to expose everyone and have that exposure so that, you know, some people do try to look at others as being different, but it's really just about we're all human beings. So I think it does start when they're younger.
And William, I believe you had something to add. Yeah, I would like to speak on community accountability, because the community is accountable for being involved and delivering these messages to IAD, Indiana Association for the Deaf, and to the deaf community. And the Black deaf community needs to get involved in the IAD meetings. We also need to get involved in other aspects of the deaf community within the state. If we don't get involved, then these patterns will simply repeat themselves, and no one will learn about the issues that we're facing. That is an excellent point, William. I would like to see a cross membership between IAD and the Indiana chapter of Black Deaf Advocates. You know, each organization, I would love to have members of each organization attend the meetings and sessions for other organizations, because we all do have different backgrounds and experience different challenges. And if we can only be exposed to each other's issues, then we can have various cultural perspectives and views, which will only foster a better relationship. If we can get to know if we can learn what's going on between the groups and between the organizations and understand the organization's functions fully and thoroughly, I think that that would create a very smooth relationship and smooth the issues at hand. Are there already some Indiana Black deaf advocates involved in these organizations, or are there not in Indiana? Debrica.
Yes, I have been a member, but again, I still feel we need to start. I started as a youth member in 1997. I went to the Youth Empowerment Summer, yes, in 97. So I was a sophomore. I was 15 years old and got involved that way. Did that for 3 years, then graduated. And I have been a part of Icbda ever since. I was a member. I've been a member for over 20 years. I was president for 3 years and I was treasurer as well for a couple of years. So I've been I've been very active in MBDA.
Well, for the Indiana chapter, now I moved here from another state and I worked as a teacher's aide for a long time. But I became involved in the Black Deaf Advocates here in Indiana in 2005, so much later in my life. Eventually, I started as secretary, eventually served as vice president, and now I have left the presidency, but I am involved in the board with Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence as well. These organizational memberships give me such rich experiences and give me perspectives from other people in the community. And I think that students need to be encouraged to start getting involved in the, for example, in the junior NAD, National Association of the Deaf. In the junior NAD, there aren't very many kids of color. And I would like to see them get more involved in those general organizations as well. It is absolutely allowed, but they're not often compelled to join. So it is incumbent upon us to educate the children and to make sure that they receive a warm welcome when they join such organizations. There are so many children out there, but why don't they show up at the organizations or functions like the junior NAD? We need to try to encourage kids to get involved. We need more allyship in our community to encourage that growth in our youth. Moving on to the next question, could you please experience the impact of racism in your life and in your family's life? Debrica wants to start.
Yes, I've experienced it frequently. I would
If you
have to
could give a
admit that.
couple, sure, if you could give a couple of examples, that would be fantastic.
There'd be so many, but I can give a few quick examples. Some of you may know that I have a deaf child and he just graduated.
Oh, fantastic. Wow, he's already grown up. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it.
Yes, yes. He's gotten old quickly, and that means I'm older, right? Um, I just think it's, I have good skin. So anyways, I was talking with my son, DJ, and asked if he was experiencing any oppression at school or anywhere else. And I said, why didn't you tell me that a long time ago? And he said, well, it happened during middle school. And a teacher said, as you age, you're still going to be less than. And I really didn't understand why they would even say something like that to him. And then additionally, something else that occurred. Oh, I've got to take a moment. Whew. I had to email the principal because of this. I received an email from the principal, and it said that my son was groping another guy's rear end, and they said he was suspended for 3 days. And I was like, something's not right. I know how my son is. There's no way he was groping someone else's ass, a boy's ass. Excuse my language. So when he got home, I asked him about it. I said, what happened at school? And he was extremely upset. He didn't even want to talk about it. He wouldn't talk for the entire day. And so I was giving him some time to cool off. The next day, I felt like he'd cooled off. So I tried to broach the subject. And I said, what happened? And he said, I didn't touch anybody like that. And so I tried to just listen to what he had to say. And I reached out to the principal and I said, I would like to meet. So I went in for the meeting, and the two principals and another woman, I'm not going to mention anyone's names, but they said, oh yes, there were 6 students that reported that he had done that he was grabbing another person's rear. And I asked who it was, and they said they couldn't tell me who. And they said, we can't tell you who the student is. And I said, well, if they're going to file charges against my son, then I need to know who it is. And then they finally told me who the student was. And I said, there's no way. And I really point blank asked, did you investigate this? And then it turned out they had not really investigated this. They had just believed the other child and that was it. And they didn't believe my child, but they did not investigate the situation. So, oh my goodness, I was furious, of course. But that moment really struck me that maybe there was racism there at the school as well, even in the administration. And I know my child. He was born deaf. And he's been in the school since he was 18 months old. And I have trusted them with my child since he was this young. And then I'm realizing that racism is even there and pervasive in this place. And how is it impacting my child? And so I'm not sure that I actually trust ISD. And now with grandchildren at some point, just because he's Black. And I really just wanted to check out at that point. So those are the kinds of things that we deal with.
Well, he has graduated, and school and university and other organizations, I mean, racism is so pervasive everywhere. You're going to see it everywhere in the world that you go.
Yes.
And I'm very familiar with that. Robert, did you have something to add? Yep, this isn't an easy story for me to share. I generally don't share it except amongst my closest friends, because every time I do, it triggers emotions for me. The incident that occurred, I never thought would occur to myself or to my family. But when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and then we saw Eric Garner murdered, and people started commenting that there's a systemic racism, I was in New Mexico at the time teaching PE and health classes for 4 years down there. And when I came to Indiana at first, I was in Fort Wayne, which is a city north of Indianapolis. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. And so it was my last sister. We're a family of 5, and I'm next to last. I was young. I was 19 years old. And this incident had an impact on my family. So a police officer shot my brother, and he did die. My brother at the time was unarmed. He was shot in the back. And the policeman, when he wrote his report, said that my brother was resisting. And of course, he wasn't. He might have made a mistake. He probably shouldn't have run from the police. But I think he was freaked out. I think he was frightened. And he had his hands up, but the police shot him in the back more than 8 times. And in the police report, the police report was riddled with lies and erroneous information. And that's what caused us to move away from that city. And I realized at that point that was something that impacted our family, and it really hit us hard. And I looked for somebody to blame, but who could I blame but the officer? I also had a second experience that my ex-partner, who was white, we had been together for almost 7 years, called me the N-word, and I thought maybe it was out of anger. But it happened a second and third time, and it was intentional. And I could see how racism was pervasive even in my partner's family. And that had such an impact on our relationship. Oh my God, that is heartbreaking to hear. And thank you for sharing that with us. And I don't think that's easy to share, but this is what Black Lives Matter is all about, the listening to these stories. It's so easy to tell stories that only touch the surface of what we all know, but sharing your story like that really could have an impact on anyone.
And it could happen to anyone.
Absolutely.
Well, I've had a variety of incidents. There's one in particular with police brutality that I experienced. It was one night I was driving. I left a friend's house. I was at a party, and was headed out, and I noticed there were lights flashing behind me. There was a police car behind me, and I didn't think I was speeding. So, of course, I pulled over, and the police officer came right at me with his gun out immediately. And I really didn't understand why he had his gun out. And, you know, when you get pulled over, they always come to the driver's side, but they were actually coming up on the passenger side. And then there was this loud noise. There were two police officers coming at me, and I was just in a panic. My heart was racing, and I thought maybe they misunderstood and thought I was someone else. And so I, of course, had my hands raised, and of course they started talking to me, and I was trying to, you know, listen as best I could. And I tried to explain to them I was deaf, and I was very cautious about moving because I was afraid. We've just seen so many incidents that happen where somebody moves wrong, makes a wrong move, and they start shooting. So I just kept pointing to my ear and trying to emphasize that I couldn't hear. And he even said, "Get out of the car, boy." And that word that was used in that manner. So really took me off guard. I got out. Again, he was speaking furiously at me, pointing and gesturing and pointing a gun at me, and then pushed me up against the hood of my car, face down, and really just manhandled me, yanked my arm behind my shoulder. And I had had shoulder surgery not long before that, 3 months prior. And so I screamed in pain. And then I heard very clearly, once again, the police officer saying, "Shut up, boy." I mean, the pain was intense. I was crying from the pain. And I really just, I was just lost, and I couldn't move. And it was over at that point. And you know, I couldn't understand anything they were saying. So then in the police officer's car, they searched my car, and they saw my ISD identification, and I could see they
Thank
realized
goodness.
at that moment that I was deaf. And so then other cars arrived on the scene, more police officers arrived on the scene. And it was really sad. I couldn't even use my right hand at that point because they had injured me to that extent. So I was trying to text and communicate, and it was just such a challenge. And then they tried to play it off. And of course, they dismissed me. I was able to go home, but it was a traumatic experience and the most terrifying moment
Oh,
of my life. I mean, these police officers were huge. They came out of nowhere and just took me down. So every
oh,
day is
I
a
couldn't.
blessing, and I'm just thankful to be here. But, you know, honestly, after everything happened with George Floyd, I mean, I felt
Awful,
that to the
awful.
marrow of my bones. And I mean, I felt that I had that same experience, and it's heart wrenching. And the harm and the damage that they do is real. And that is the message that we need to communicate. This Black Lives Matter is not just a fad. It
It
is a real
isn't,
issue, and we
absolutely
need to
not.
stand strong, and we need to continue. And the time is now. Enough is enough.
And this is why the protests continue. This is why they continue. We've experienced protests in the past, but they have been short-lived because promises were continually made that things would change, that the system would change. But this protest is here to stay, and we will not rest until change has occurred. And that's why we're still protesting.
And with Black Lives Matter now, there are so many protests happening. People are doing damage, et
Oh,
cetera, et
yeah.
cetera. I know it's extreme, but honestly, I feel like, what other choice do we have? We have to
I
make
absolutely.
enough noise. We've tried, and it's come to this extreme where damage has to happen to force movement. Uh, Now they will start processing this and moving forward. And that's where we are. In a lot of people think it's extreme, and I know it is, but and yes, of course, some of the negative instances we don't want to see happen, but sometimes we have to step up and we have to send a message.
Absolutely.
And sometimes this
Yes,
is
we
the only
do.
way.
Thank you for sharing, Onye. What a heartbreaking story. I think Ronell was next, then Dabrika, then William. When I watched Roberts and Onye's stories, that really hit home for me, and it hit a raw spot with me. I think racism obviously has had an impact in my life at the deaf school, but my biggest impact actually happened at my apartment. My youngest child, or my father, my youngest child's father went out shopping, and I said, no, I don't think there's a cop at my house. And he said, yeah, there's a cop here. And I said, no, there can't be. Excuse me, 20 police are showing up at my house. And he said, yeah, there are. So I gave up on the shopping and I came home, and sure enough, there was a slew of police cars in front of my apartment. And they were in my house and at my apartment. And what's more, they were in my apartment when I was not there. They entered my apartment.
And no warrant?
No warrant. And so I asked if they had paperwork, and I said, well, where's the interpreter? Where's this? Where's that? I was shocked that they were in my apartment. And what had happened was that there were fireworks. It was the day before the 4th of July. Of course, here in our city, we're not supposed to let off fireworks before the 4th of July. Now, I didn't even know that that was happening, but they thought that I had a gun. And anyway, they entered my apartment. And when I came in, they had not only entered my apartment, they'd ransacked it. They didn't apologize. They didn't give any explanation except that they had gotten the wrong place. And my daughter was scared out of her mind. She was 5 years old, and having walked in and seen that. The police chief came by and then did apologize, and then but the other officer who was responsible for the entire investigation did not ever apologize. What was the intent? What was the purpose of entering my apartment? Did I break any laws? There was nothing that warranted such an action. But I had to fight the system, and I felt like I'd lost all of my privileges and all of the rights that I had as a human being, and I came to think that they wear uniforms to exercise power over people. 20 police officers were at my apartment. And that was a reflection to my neighbors too. Everybody was staring at me, and that draws attention to me, and that's embarrassing. And not even giving full information to me. They just, and they didn't end up arresting anybody at all in this entire incident. But it made me feel like a lesser person. That was the first traumatic experience, but the second one was with my daughter at school. So she was going to school, and she was attending regularly, had not missed a day. But when I watched her celebration for, the awards, the end of year awards celebration that they usually have, I attended that ceremony, and my daughter's name was not called. So she felt awful and started crying. And so I got upset, and I called a meeting with the teacher and the principal, and I said, you gave every student an award except for her. What was that all about? So they eventually did give her an award commensurate with her classmates for perfect attendance. But she was overlooked in that, and she had perfect attendance all year, and she knew that, and she wasn't acknowledged during the ceremony. I feel that it's important to take action against those types of things, because I need to show her who we are and who I am. And I have many more stories I could tell, but those are the two I can share right now. Oh, I am sure that you could share thousands, and unfortunately, we only have time for 2 out of those thousands. Oh my goodness, I'm looking at the time. It is almost 7:45. We do have 15 minutes left for Q&A, or we'd like to have some time left. But let's wrap up with this question. on the impact of racism on you personally. Did anyone else want to share any other experiences? Yes, William, how has racism impacted you or your family?
Yes, well, I was raised away from Indiana, not here. And there were a group of us, maybe one or two, at the deaf camp. It was a area that we drove through on our way to deaf camp. We were going through the woods, and I was just checking to make sure I was going the right direction. I wasn't sure where I was going. I needed to stop. So it happened that I turned around in the middle of the road. And of course, a police officer came up behind me very quickly with his sirens flashing and pulled me over. And the police officer was talking on his walkie-talkie. I couldn't understand anything that was being said. He came over. It was extremely dark, so I wasn't sure even what to do. So he approached my window and he slammed his hand against it, his fist against the side of the car very quickly. And of course, the kids in the car were freaking out. And my wife was just puzzled as to what was going on. So I rolled down my window to look, and they started talking to me and had a gun
A
out
gun?
and immediately put it in my face. And the kids started to get out of the car, and my wife tried to get out. And, you know, in that moment, everything changed. I don't know if it's because my wife is white, but all of a sudden, their mannerisms, their behavior completely changed. They were sending the kids back in the car and trying to send us on our way. And if my wife had not been with me, I just really can't even fathom what the situation would have escalated.
What a story. Thank you for sharing, because I think that is an important story to listen to. And I want to turn it over now to Tim, though, who is monitoring in the background, to see if there are any questions that have popped up in the chat. So we do have Tim Albert manning our chat room. And it is now 7:50. So we do, oh boy, that time has passed so quickly. I feel like we could talk all night on this topic. Tim, are there any questions?
Hello. Yes, we do have two questions.
Excellent.
So there have been a lot of comments, which are really touching. But one question in particular is from Cynthia Floyd from Indiana. And her question is, where do we start as a school? Any advice for our school? Where do we start?
Could you restate that question, Tim?
Yes, just suggestions for the school as a whole. Where do we begin? How do we start this?
With Black Lives Matter?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat that question then. So the question is, where do we start with our school, our deaf school, in the Black Lives Matter movement? If we could have one or two comments, and then we'll go on to the second question, as we are on a time constraint. Laureen, do you mean where do we start as a school?
And this, I believe it starts everywhere.
Well, it starts with education, exposure.
Tim, could you give us some clarification on that?
I'm back.
Did you go golfing?
Tim, the question is not clearly defined. So there is some question from our panelists as to the intent of the question.
Okay, I'll ask for some clarification, but the next question is from Catherine Vest. When is the next ICBDA meeting? That's the question posed.
Well, I think we can answer that. Who can answer that? Who knows when the next meeting is?
I can answer that.
William? Excellent. Thank you.
We will have to talk with the board members right now because of COVID-19. Things are really on pause. We can't get together in person, but we have been having conversation about hosting a Zoom meeting. So there is that potential in the works. And once we get a time and date together, we'll make sure that we make that known so that just keep an eye on the Icbda page.
Thank you very much for that information. Tim, are there any more questions before we move on?
Lorraine, I say continue.
Okay, I shall. So I do have a final question to pose to the panelists. And the question is an exploration of the word intersectionality. And that's referring to the multiple identities that we carry. For example, I'm a Black, deaf woman who's old. So I'm not just a woman. I have multiple aspects to my identity that intersect. But I would like you to speak to the intersectionality of racism and the oppression. So the intersectionality of racism and the oppression that you then see within some organizations. So maybe there's an entire organization that is known for being oppressive of women, or oppressive of deaf people, or oppressive of all categories. So the question asks you to explore that intersectionality a little bit and what you've experienced. Ronelle? Is this a general question or specific to organizations? It is specific to organizations. I can speak to a traumatic experience I've had. For example, I might be a woman and in a group of women, but all the rest of the women are white.
Yeah, but she's talking specifically about intersectionality in organizational experiences.
I think I'm about to get to that because it's an experience that I had with an organization where, as a Black woman, I was in an organization of all white women, and I experienced that oppression, and it was based on status. At one point in my life, I served on a board, and I was very interested in doing that. But in another organization, for IAD, let's say, it was an organization similar to IAD, but someone approached me, and I was serving as vice president of this organization at the time. Somebody approached me and said, "You couldn't possibly be vice president." And I said, "Well, I certainly am." I said, "Are you telling me that you don't think that I'm smart enough to be vice president?" And she replied, "Well, certainly not, because you don't have the background to do so." Now in IAD, I was very successful. And in that way, I had proved my skills and shown that I had the capability to run this other organization. But that kind of experience there speaks to the intersectionality of my identity. I really had to stand up for myself. I could not let her see me be upset, even though I was. And then when I approached IAD and went back to IAD and was upset, and I served on an all-white board there, it really hit home for them on how that works. But once I got involved in the organization, I will say that it wasn't so easy to stay involved. It was very difficult to maintain that the relationships there, because I was very aware at all times that I was on their turf. I was automatically, because of the color of my skin, looked down upon as something lesser than, even though I'm experienced in education. I work at the Indiana School for the Deaf, and I've worked in multiple organizations. But this is what hit home for me, and I wish this kind of example could be more prevalent in the community, that I can go to college, I can be a nurse, I can be whatever you want me to, whatever I want to be. As soon as I reveal myself and who I am, it can be very joyful. But I've experienced so much oppression and so much criticism. And what I'd like to see is the system change. And I really want to be a voice for this work that we're doing now. I'm 50 years old at this point. And before I die and before I leave this earth, I would like to see Black lives truly matter. I've already lived through the part of the 70s and 80s and 90s, and people telling me that I can't do these things because of the fact that I'm deaf and Black. So setting the system up for people to fail is not what we need. We need to fix the system, not the people on the ground. Time is running out. We do have 5 more minutes left, so I would like to open this up for comments unless Tim has clarification on those questions or additional questions. We do only have 5 minutes, so I'd like to answer the questions briefly.
I actually have several questions now, so I'm just going to choose one that I think is really a critical question to address. The
Absolutely.
question is, within the school system, where do we start to address Black Lives Matter and the issues that lie therein?
That's a good question. And I think that's the clarifying question. So if there is anyone who has not yet commented in this last portion, I'd like to give you the chance. Sure. So within the school system, where's the ideal place to start within the school system for addressing Black Lives Matter? Is that clearer?
So at ISD.
Would any of you like to tackle that question?
If I could ask a clarifying question. So how do we start with the students? How do we address it for the students? Is that what the question is?
That is the question. Where does one begin within the school? Where would be the ideal place to start? Would it be in after-school programming? Would it be at the middle school, the high school, the elementary school? So the question that came up in the chat room is, where do you really start?
I would like to answer that with elementary students. We have to have the exposure there. We have to have the staff there learning. What does this all mean? What does Black Lives Matter mean? So the staff have to understand it so that they can address it with the students. The response should never be from the staff members, oh, I don't know what that means. You need to ask your parents. So, we have to remember that a lot of our students don't have access to language at home with their parents. So it starts with our staff members and the exposure to our students in the elementary level.
I see what you mean. William, would you mind adding to that? I would say that the schools generally don't have enough exposure to Black Lives Matter because there aren't enough Black staff. And especially for children who are in mainstream schools or are the only deaf child in an entire school, they might not get that exposure unless they take history classes later on in 5th grade and maybe then again in middle school. So there isn't much Black history there to contend with and to learn. Yeah, and Ranelle, if you'd like to add a last comment. I see Dabrika's point on that. I think exposing children from a very young age, as early as kindergarten, would be ideal. When I was growing up within the deaf school, I wanted to be very clear that I had really no identity.
Mm-hmm.
any education for 9 months is just not enough. I think education needs to be year round. We need to be exposing our children constantly to all the information that's out there. Because once they're in school, it is a different culture. They have a different exposure while they're in school. And so it needs to happen also when they're outside of school and at home. All right, if we have 2 minutes left, so I would like 2 words from each of you to sum up your thoughts for this evening. If you could just toss out a couple of words to wrap up. So let's go. Anye.
For the Black Deaf community, I'd just like to say, don't give up, stay strong, keep fighting.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Dabrika.
I don't have an answer yet. I'm sorry. Go with someone else,
Okay,
please.
no problem, no problem. Renelle. Who? Oh, me? Equal justice and equality and allyship. Those are my words. Beautiful. Robert.
I say unity. Unity. We've
Unity.
got to stay together. We can't give up. We've got to stay strong.
Beautiful. William. Well, I'll defer to Dabrika.
Okay, well, I would say respect.
Respect.
That's where it all comes from. You know, we don't want to look down on others. Respect and listen and empathy.
Empathy. Beautiful. William,
And
you're the
equality.
final, and equality. William, final word? Still thinking? You're not obligated to answer. Robert, did you have something else to add? I say be proud and be proud to be Black. And on that note, I think that's a fantastic way to wrap this up. It is not easy to unpack this information, and it's not easy to share your traumatic experiences, but I like the ending note, be proud to be Black. I now turn it over to Tim to wrap things up.
Absolutely. We had about over 300 views.
Oh, that's fantastic. Congratulations,
for this
everyone.
Evening. And many people are saying, stay on, we want to see more. So I do want to let you know this is not the end. There will be more dialogue coming. So there are next steps. What's important is I do want to thank our 2 interpreters as well who have been voicing throughout this.
Thank you, interpreters.
And that's all. We'll see you next time to our next dialogue. That's it from me. I'll sign off.
And so do I then close the meeting?
We'll let Jennifer do it.